Hello sa inyong lahat dyan, mga uh, Knights of Rizal and others who are listening and watching this video. I decided to edit my videos para mas maganda yung presentation. So hopefully mas magustuhan nyo ang video natin ngayon about Rizal. This time around, London, an overview. Ginamit ko pala yung internet din as my resource. Merong presentation dun sa isang website, Prezi. And nakita ko itong isang presentation na to. At maganda naman. Anyway, this is just an overview. So hopefully it will work. It's a nice presentation. I give credit to the author. So anyway, Rizal was in London in 1888 to 1889. He came in London in May 1888 until March of 1889. So he was there for 10 months. And Rizal was really enthused this time around. Like I said before, Rizal was already a made man. He's a author of Noli Me Tangere. He's established himself as a leader, at least in the intellectual fight for against Spanish abuses in the Philippines. And also he's a doctor, so he has some prestige there too. So he went to London after having a trip from the United States. The reasons why he went to London was, one, to improve his English, although we know that he is a master linguist in, I think, 22 languages. But still, he wanted to improve his knowledge about the English language. And another reason was and the much bigger reason, I think, was he wanted to annotate Morga's Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, which was back then one of the many historical accounts of friars in the Philippines. There are others that he studied too, but he found Morga as more interesting and more truthful. Also, he thought, again, London particularly was a safe place to carry his fight against the Spanish regime and abuses in the Philippines. So Rizal went aboard the city of Rome. When he was while he was aboard, he befriended the other passengers, both Europeans and Americans, and he actually impressed them with the defensive use of the yo-yo. The yo-yo, is a disc with a string on it that's played in the Philippines by the kids. Also he arrived in London, England, in May 24, 1888. He spent time in Adelphi Hotel, and he actually wrote a letter to his family about this in London. How he was impressed with the port. So he stayed after staying there one night. He stayed at another home of an exile, Dr. Antonio Regidor. He's been exiled since 1872. That's the Gambursa, when the Gambursa was guillotined. So he was a practicing lawyer, and actually Dr. Rigidor played an important role in the Philippine history even after Rizal. But interestingly, he was not in Rizal's life. He was really a major part, and until until he stayed there for one night in his house, and then he found an apartment. Mr. Beckett, who is a organist in St. Paul's Church, who's married to, obviously, Mrs. Beckett, who was fond of Rizal and talked a lot about and was amazed with Rizal's uh, liking magic and ventriloquism. He also met. They also had two sons and four girls, and of course the eldest daughter was Gertrude, or Toti, or Getty, as Rizal would call him. Also, while he was in London, he got to know a librarian from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and an author of Malayan languages and customs. He was impressed with Rizal, and they became very good friends. In fact, on Sundays, he would spend time with the family and with his sons in particular, also playing sports, including boxing. Uh, his total stay in the Philippines consisted of a lot of good news and a lot of bad news, mostly bad news actually. Of course, the persecution of the Filipinos continues. One example was the sign. There were Filipinos who signed the Anti-Friar Petition Act of 1888 to, I guess, recall one of the friars in from the Philippines, and of course, uh, the Filipinos got in trouble with that. Incidentally, it was said that Marcelo H. del Pilar was the one who penned this petition. Also, of course, the Calamba tenants was also part of the bad news, as they were persecuted. In fact, one of the very first article of Dr. Rizal in La Solidaridad was about Filipino farmers. I'm sure it has something to do with the situations of the Calamba tenants. Also, there were attacks on the Noli Me Tangere, both from the Spanish Cortes senators, two senators from the Spanish Cortes, and a very, I think it was Father Garcia, who's also a staunch uh, critic of Noli Me Tangere. Also, his brother-in-law, married to his eldest sister Saturnina, was also summarily exiled in Bohol without due process. Uh, he has a friend also, who was a medical student in UST, who got into the Bilibid prison because he was caught with the Noli Me Tangere in his home. There were some good news. There's not all the friars were against him. Dr. Reverend Vicente Garcia defended the Noli against attacks of the friars, so he was happy about that. Uh, and those two were some of the more positive news that he had in the Philippines. But his greatest achievement, really, when he stayed in London, was the annotation of Morga. Morga's book was published in Mexico in 1609. Now, Morga, and we will talk about this, is a emissary, or a public official who served in the Philippines. I think he died in the Philippines too, and we're going to check on that. He also read some of the other historians, Father Chirino, Father Collins, Father Argonsola, and Father Pacencia, but he did like the uh, Morga's historical accounts of the Philippines, and that's why he did annotate them. Uh, because he, in his letter to Bloom and Treat, he said that it leaves a lot of uh, uh, interpretation. It leaves a lot of space for interpretation. So that's exactly what he did. He annotated the Successos de las Islas Filipinas while he was there, and consumed most of his time. Um, in fact, he did not. He also, as part of his study, also went to Spain for Paris for a week. Of course, he while there he met with the Luna family, Juan Luna, who's a brother of Antonio Luna, General Antonio Luna. He went to um, Paris to again study some more Philippine documents that was found in the library in Paris. In December 11 of the same year, 1888, he went to Spain visiting Madrid and Barcelona, and this he met the two of the foremost propagandists, which is Marcelo Pilar and Mariano Ponce, who he had never met before, and this started a um, a relationship that paved the way for him being very involved in the struggle against Spanish abuse while in Europe. He did spend Christmas in with the Becketts, and in during Christmas time, he gave he, as we know, he is also an artist. He was in he was he, good with sculpture, and as a Christmas gift, he gave Blumentritt a bust of Emperor Augustus, who was at that time he referenced as who was at that time the emperor while Jesus Christ was alive. He also wrote about religion to Blumentritt about while spending Christmas in London with the Becketts. Also, there's another character that was not very much talked about, Dr. Carlos Sepelak, and he gave him a bust of Julius Caesar. Now, on the other hand, like I said, Mrs. Beckett gave him a book because he was really Rizal was involved with as was fond of magic. Gave him a book entitled "The Life and Adventure of Valentine Vaux, the Ventriloquist." The one thing that came about with his friendship with the Mariano Ponce and Marcelo is just del Pilar is he became the titular head of the Lazaro Daridad, excuse me, which was inaugurated on December 31st at the end of the year. Uh, Shortly after he met with them on December 1st. Of course, the president was Garciano Apacible. Uh, Garciano Lopez Haina was the vice president, and of course, he founded Laridad's uh, newsletter. And Maria Santa Maria was secretary, Mariano Ponce's treasurer, and Jose Maria Panginiban was accountant. All of these names had very important part in Philippine history. But of course, it's all overshadowed by Rizal's involvement. So Rizal was recognized as a titular head of that organization. Now, the Lazar Daridad just was a formal organization, again, basically to continue uh, championing the call for more participation of the Filipinos, more respect to the Filipinos, more democracy in the Philippines as far as human rights, and also it wanted to expose the abuses of the Spanish friars during that time. Like I said, the first article of Dr. Rizal at La Solidaridad, I was right, was about the farmers and was published in March 25, 1889. This was 6 days after he left London for Paris. Basically, talking about how the uh, Filipino landowners, farmers, are being abused by the system and really powerless and was not able to prosper in their industry because of controls, unfair controls. Um, he one of the staunch No Limitangere critic was Fry Rodriguez, and this is one time that he used his nom de plume, and he wrote a pamphlet about Fry Rodriguez and how he was a joke and how he was not respected in his writing. and he used his nom de plume de Masalang in writing this pamphlet, and it was in Spanish and actually some in Latin too, which is very very impressive. One of the uh, writings that Rizal did in our vernacular was the young women of Malolos. He wrote this in February 22, 1889, and he wrote this in Tagalog, and this was after he was asked by his friend, now friend Marcelo H. Pilar, to write to the women of Malolos who were asked petitioning to have a school wherein they will learn Spanish, and of course there was a friar that was against it. But basically, the letter wanted to encourage the Filipino mothers, their roles in rearing their children, uh, and how the Filipino women should be uh, treated with dignity, honor, and how education should be the backdrop of all this, and at the same time being more being more in good terms with their moral backgrounds and manners, and not just having religious pictures and long prayers as a manifestation of their faith. Um, he also another writing that he did was a Tagalog folklores, and we'll go through that. He Dr. Host, who was the librarian that he befriended, and also a Malayan language and folklore uh, expert, asked him to write to his uh, newsletter, the Tubler's Record, and he did write the sayings in this journal, and also he also published two Eastern people, which was I think a fable. So, and we will go through that to talk about his writings. So basically, of course, we know that he also had a romance with Gertrude Beckett, but he cut that short because Gertie was getting serious about the relationship, and Rizal was really zeroed in on his grand design to be uh, uh, to, to be a beacon of truth about Philippine situation. So he ended that relationship by leaving for good on March 1889. So uh, March 19, 1889, he left the Beckett family and London for good, and he went to Paris to pursue more uh, worthwhile endeavors. And like I said, this is a overview of his trip to London. The next time we have a blog, we will talk about more in depth on his patriotism while in London. It was like patriotism in steroids. It was really effective. He was really really zeroed in on his task, his self-proclaimed, self-appointed task, and it really did a major uh, part in the struggle against the Spain and the through literary uh, writings that Rizal did first as a writer of La Solidaridad and the letter to the women of Malolos, and the folklore that he wrote after he was invited by Dr. Host. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you learned a little bit. This is an overview, like I said, and I'll see you next time on the next episode of Rizal in London. Thank you so much, and I will see you guys later. Have a good night.